Dust choked the stale air of the small, boarded-up cabin nestled in the woods of what used to be northern Colorado. The world outside had long since gone quiet, overrun by the infected, roaming, soulless husks that once resembled people. Now, they drifted through shattered cities and overgrown highways like shadows of a memory. Inside the cabin, 28-year-old Thomas Reed stood frozen, his flashlight beam locked on a crack behind a loose wooden plank. He had stumbled upon this cabin 2 nights ago, desperate for shelter and food. The cold had grown sharper, biting harder than it had last winter, and Thomas knew he couldn't stay out in the open much longer. He hadn't expected much, some dried food if he was lucky, maybe a working radio if fate was feeling kind. What he found instead was far more dangerous, and far more important. His fingers pried the plank loose with a groan of splintering wood. A folded, yellowed piece of paper fell into the dust. Thomas picked it up carefully, heart thudding. It wasn't just a map, it was hand-drawn. Red ink slashed across its surface, marking cities, roads, and strange symbols. There were notes in the margins, too small, cramped handwriting in faded black ink. Safe zone? June 30, confirmed radio signal. Avoid Denver. No survivors. Swarm activity. Haven Point, scavenged supplies, untouched. Thomas sat back, running a hand through his messy hair. The name on the bottom corner chilled him. J. Reed. His older brother, Jacob. Thomas hadn't seen Jacob since the second outbreak wave, nearly 10 months ago. Jacob had always been the planner, the survivalist. If anyone could last this long, it would have been him. But Jacob was also careful. If he left this map behind, it meant something had gone wrong. A single knock echoed from the door. Thomas's body tensed. Not a loud bang. Just one knock. Measured. Intentional. He moved silently, taking his bat from the wall and creeping toward the window. Peeking through the slats, he saw nothing at first, then a flash of movement near the tree line. A shadow darted between trunks. Not one of them, the infected didn't sneak. This was something else. He backed away from the window, grabbed the map, and stuffed it into his jacket. Time to move. He didn't trust anyone. Not anymore. As he slipped out the back door, crunching quietly over dead leaves, Thomas moved through the forest with the practiced caution of someone who had survived alone for far too long. He could still feel the weight of the map pressing against his chest. Jacob had left this for someone to find. Maybe for him. Maybe not. But if there was even a chance his brother was still alive. The map showed a red trail leading east, crossing abandoned highways, through small towns, and finally into what used to be Kansas. It mentioned something cryptic in the margin. The library has what they need. Thomas didn't know what that meant, but he didn't have the luxury of ignoring it. An hour later, under the dull gray sky of early morning, Thomas found the first mark from the map. A rusted road sign, bent sideways, sprayed with the symbol from the drawing, a circle with an X slashed through it. Below it, in red paint. Trust no one. He stared at it. The paint was still fresh. Someone else was following the map. He wasn't alone. That night, Thomas made camp inside the hollowed remains of an old church along the path marked on the map. As he boiled a can of beans over a low fire, he heard something, a shuffle of gravel. Slowly, silently, he turned and peeked through a broken stained glass window. In the distance, just beyond the firelight, a figure stood watching. Not moving. Not approaching. Just watching. Thomas stared back, hands slowly drifting toward the knife on his belt. But before he could move, the figure stepped back into the shadows and disappeared into the night. He didn't sleep that night. Someone was following him. Was it a survivor like him? A threat? Or someone who knew the truth behind the map's destination? As dawn broke and the sky turned a sickly yellow, Thomas packed up and continued following the clues. He didn't know what he would find next. But one thing was clear, this journey wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about uncovering something left behind in the ruins of dead America. And someone else wanted it just as badly. End of part 1. Let me know when you're ready for part 2 or if you'd like the outline for all 8 parts next. You said. Thomas moved fast. The stranger in the shadows from last night still lingered in his thoughts like smoke he couldn't wave away. He'd survived too long to ignore a gut feeling, and right now, his gut screamed danger. The map led him to an old town called Ashridge, marked with a red dot and a single word beside it. Scavenged. Radio found. Look again. He crested the ridge that overlooked the town just before noon. From above, Ashridge looked forgotten, swallowed by nature and silence. Houses collapsed into themselves, vehicles overgrown with vines, and not a single infected in sight. That unsettled him more than a horde ever could. Something felt wrong. Thomas descended slowly, stepping carefully as he entered the town. His eyes moved across every window, every broken fence. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that usually came after something had gone horribly wrong. He checked the map again. There was a small star on the southern edge of town, near what looked like a public building. He followed broken sidewalks until he found it, a community radio station, its sign barely clinging to the rusted frame. Inside, dust blanketed every surface. Chairs lay toppled. The door to the broadcast room hung off its hinges. But what caught his attention was the wall. Pinned across it were dozens of photos, maps, and journal pages. Everything was old, yellowing. Some of it had dried blood splatters. Thomas moved closer, heart racing. One photo showed Jacob standing beside 2 other survivors, both of whom had their faces scratched out in black ink. A voice crackled behind him. "Don't turn around." Thomas froze. The voice was low, male, and steady. It didn't shake. Didn't waver. "You're following the map, aren't you?" Thomas stayed still, his fingers tightening around the knife at his belt. "Who are you?" Thomas asked, his voice even. "Someone who followed it before. Someone who knows where it ends." The sound of a shotgun cocking echoed in the room. "Step away from the wall." Slowly. Thomas obeyed. He stepped sideways, giving the man space, then spun quickly, knife drawn. But there was no one. No man. No shotgun. Just an old radio receiver in the corner of the room, powered by a car battery, with a speaker still glowing faintly. He was being watched. Thomas ran outside, scanning rooftops and alleyways. A figure stood briefly on the roof of the hardware store across the street. Black jacket. Hood. Then gone. He knew this wasn't a game. Someone else was not just following him, they were tracking him. Listening. Testing him. Back inside the radio station, Thomas yanked down the old maps, finding more handwritten notes behind them. One caught his eye. Haven Point. Code word, Oracle. If you make it past the checkpoints, use it. It was the second time that name had come up. Haven Point. Whatever it was, that was the next major destination. Thomas left Ashridge quickly, the unease never leaving his back. He traveled south, following an old rail line that curved around the mountains. The map marked an old rest stop as a possible checkpoint. By nightfall, he reached it. The place was half collapsed, vending machines overturned, the glass long shattered. Yet, inside the convenience store, something waited. A box of clean bandages. A sealed can of soup. A flashlight with working batteries. Too clean. Too well placed. And on the wall, scratched in permanent marker. Still watching. Why you? Thomas stared at the message for a long time. Whoever was ahead of him, or following him, was now leaving breadcrumbs. Testing him. The next clue was written beneath in that same, sharp handwriting. To go forward, look back. Red truck. Under the seat. Thomas turned. The red truck sat just outside, almost invisible behind a crumbling billboard. He approached it carefully, broke the driver's window with his elbow, and opened the rusted door. Under the seat, wrapped in cloth, was an old cassette tape and a small, blood-stained journal. The cassette had a single word written on it in smudged ink. Jacob. Heart pounding, Thomas tucked both items into his bag. He didn't have a cassette player, not yet, but he'd find one. He had to. As he stepped away from the truck, he heard movement behind him. Gravel shifting. He turned, weapon drawn. But there was only an infected. It lunged. Thomas dodged, slammed his bat into its skull, and backed away, breath heavy. More were coming. He grabbed his bag and ran into the night, the map fluttering slightly from his jacket pocket. This was no longer just a journey. It was a trail of secrets, set up like a puzzle across the ruins of a fallen nation. And someone out there didn't want him to solve it first. End of part 2. The infected were closing in. Thomas sprinted down the service road, away from the rest stop, his footsteps echoing against the broken asphalt. The journal and cassette in his bag thumped against his back. He didn't stop running until the distant groans faded into nothing, replaced by the wind whispering through the ruins of old America. By morning, he found shelter inside a half-collapsed roadside diner. There, in the back office, sat an old battery-powered radio cassette player. Rusted but intact. He snapped in the cassette, heart pounding. Click. Static hissed. Then came a voice. Jacob's voice. If you're hearing this, you found the map. That means you're either lucky, or cursed. Thomas leaned closer, listening as the voice continued, low and urgent. There's something bigger behind all this. The outbreak, the collapse, it wasn't an accident. I've seen the files, heard the confessions. They called it Project Oracle. A solution gone wrong. Or maybe right, depending on who you ask. Static again. Then a different voice. We thought we could control them. Redirect the virus. Use the infected as tools. The tape ended abruptly with a burst of garbled noise. Thomas sat frozen. Project Oracle. That was the code word scrawled on the maps, whispered in Ashridge. But what did it mean? Why would anyone want to control the infected? He opened the journal next. Pages were missing. Others were torn, some water-stained beyond recognition. But a few entries were readable, clues scattered between panic and guilt. Day 14, the others think I'm crazy. But I heard it again. Voices. Not from the dead. From the towers. They're broadcasting something. Day 20, they found me. Told me to stop. Said curiosity is dangerous now. I'm leaving. Heading west. Toward Haven Point. Day 25, they've started hunting anyone who knows. That includes me. Maybe you too. Thomas flipped the last page. A small code was scrawled across the bottom in fading red ink, CHR 27, Tower 6 to 149.55 MHz. A radio frequency. Hope sparked. If he could find a working long-range radio, he might be able to tune in, learn more, maybe even talk to someone still alive. He checked the map. Tower 6 was marked on the western edge of what used to be Colorado. It was a long journey through dangerous ground. No guarantees. But that frequency might hold answers. Packing up, Thomas moved quickly. He avoided cities, stuck to small back roads and wooded paths. Along the way, he encountered wrecked vehicles with white symbols painted on them, an eye inside a circle. The same symbol had been carved into the back of the journal. Someone had been leaving a trail. At an abandoned ranger outpost, he stopped to rest and resupply. While scavenging, he found an old emergency radio mounted on a desk, battery-powered and intact. He adjusted the frequency. 149.55 MHz. Static. Then a low hum. Then, voices. Survivors avoid main routes. Haven Point not safe. Tower 6 still operational but compromised. Repeat, Tower 6 compromised. Thomas's breath caught. He wasn't alone. People were still out there. Broadcasting. Warning. Trying to survive. He adjusted the frequency again, trying to catch more, then froze as a new voice crackled through. "You've made it further than most. I'm impressed." He backed away from the radio. That voice. It was the same one that had spoken to him through the radio station in Ashridge. "But you should stop. You're digging too deep." Thomas killed the radio, heart pounding. This wasn't just about survival anymore. Someone didn't want the truth to come out. And they had access to radios, towers, and maybe even eyes on the ground. He needed to reach Tower 6. Whatever was waiting there, it was connected to Jacob, to Project Oracle, to everything. He headed west. By sunset, he reached an old railway tunnel, one not marked on the map. But above the entrance, carved into a wooden plank, were 2 words. Safe passage. And below it, that same iron circle symbol. Inside, the tunnel was cold and silent. Echoes danced with every step. He moved cautiously, flashlight in hand. Halfway through, he saw a flickering light ahead. A fire. He approached slowly, and saw a figure seated beside the flame. A young woman. Blonde, scar on her cheek, rifle across her lap. She looked up. "You've got the journal, don't you?" she asked. Thomas said nothing. She tossed something at his feet. A patch. Faded, but readable. "Oracle Watch, Unit K. They're not just a myth," she said. "And if you're going to Tower 6, you'll need help." End of Part 3. Let me know when you want Part 4, or if you'd like a preview outline for the rest of the parts. The fire crackled low, casting shifting shadows against the damp tunnel walls. Thomas kept his hand near his pistol, eyes locked on the stranger. She didn't flinch. "I'm Clara," she said calmly. "Used to be part of Oracle Watch. Back when it was something different, before it all went wrong." Thomas didn't respond at first. He studied her. She was lean, alert. Not just another survivor, a fighter. Like someone who had seen too much and survived anyway. "You said I'd need help," he finally muttered. "Why?" Clara tossed another log into the fire. "Because Tower 6 isn't just some abandoned relay point. It's a lockbox. And someone out there is guarding the key with a lot of teeth." She nodded to the journal in his pack. "I've seen those entries. Jacob used to be my commanding officer. He found something. Something that scared even the people running the show." Thomas sat slowly, tension lingering in his bones. "Project Oracle?" Clara gave a hollow laugh. "It started as a plan to monitor outbreaks. Predict mutations. But then they learned how to manipulate them. They wanted to steer the virus. Control it like a weapon." She leaned closer, voice lowering. "But it got out. Someone let it loose, maybe on purpose. Jacob thought Tower 6 had the last clean data, the original transmission logs, recordings, maybe even the truth about the release." Thomas absorbed her words. It matched Jacob's scattered notes, the eerie radio message, the strange symbols. It was all connected. Clara unrolled a smaller, weathered map and pointed to a red circle just west of the current train tunnel. "Tower 6 is here. Remote. Surrounded by old mines. Not many make it there, and fewer come back." Thomas nodded slowly. "Then we go together." The journey to Tower 6 took 3 days. They traveled mostly at night, avoiding roaming packs of infected. Clara's instincts were razor-sharp. She knew when to run, when to freeze, and when to fight. Thomas watched her, learning, adjusting. He wasn't alone anymore, and strangely, that felt more dangerous. The land grew wilder as they climbed into the hills. Trees strangled the broken road. Vehicles rusted where they had crashed years ago. Bullet holes scarred signs. Nature had reclaimed everything except the horror. On the 3rd night, just before dawn, they reached the ridge overlooking Tower 6. The structure stood tall and skeletal against the early morning sky, a forgotten broadcast tower surrounded by a ring of fencing and 2 long, low buildings at its base. The compound was strangely intact. Lights flickered inside. Clara pulled out binoculars. Still running, she murmured. That shouldn't be possible. Thomas scanned the fence. There were no infected. No movement. Why no guards? He asked. Clara didn't answer. She was watching something else, a small black drone gliding silently through the air before vanishing behind the building. They're still here, she whispered. Whoever's running Oracle Watch now, they never left. Under the cover of darkness, they breached the fence through a collapsed section on the north side. The silence was unnerving. Not even the usual distant moans of the infected. Just the wind, and the quiet hum of unseen machines. They slipped into the first building. Empty corridors, overturned chairs, abandoned computers, and signs of a hurried evacuation. But no blood. No signs of struggle. In the main server room, a dim green light blinked on one console. Clara booted it up. A login screen appeared. Welcome to Oracle Secure System 6. Clara typed furiously. What are you looking for? Thomas asked. Logs. Broadcast data. Surveillance archives. If the original outbreak had a signal, a starting point, this tower would have picked it up. Files began opening. Audio logs. Images. Code strings. Thomas leaned over her shoulder, and then something caught his eye. A video file labeled, Day 0, Beacon Event. He clicked it. The footage showed a small town, maybe rural Kansas, peaceful, ordinary. Then, at exactly 4:12 a.m., lights across the screen flickered. A loud hum surged. Birds scattered. People stumbled out of their homes, confused. And then chaos. People dropped instantly. Twitched. Rose. And attacked. All within minutes. Thomas froze. That wasn't infection, it was activation. Like a trigger. Clara nodded grimly. That's what Jacob feared. That someone had buried the virus in people, dormant, until something flipped the switch. Suddenly, an alarm blared. Unauthorized access detected. Tower lockdown initiated. The door slammed shut behind them. Red lights spun. The power surged. And then the voice returned. The same one that had haunted the cassette and radio waves. You should have stayed away. Clara reached for her weapon. We're not alone, she whispered. End of Part 4. The steel door slammed shut with a deafening clang, sealing them inside the server room of Tower 6. The emergency lights cast the room in an ominous red glow, while a soft hum vibrated through the floor, like something deep below had just awakened. Clara's eyes darted to the vents overhead. They've got air systems running, she said. Which means this place isn't just operational, it's been maintained. Thomas kept his weapon ready, his pulse pounding in his ears. Maintained by who? That voice again, someone's watching us. Clara moved quickly, accessing another terminal. If we're locked in, there's only one way out. We need to override the internal protocol or find a maintenance hatch. Suddenly, a screen flickered on behind them. A grainy image appeared, a control room lit in blue, with a figure seated at a console, face hidden behind a featureless mask. The figure didn't speak but simply watched them. Then the voice returned, low, distorted, cold. Project Oracle must remain buried. You've seen too much. Clara cursed and yanked out a data drive, sliding it into the terminal. We're downloading everything. Whatever secrets this place holds, we're taking them. Thomas backed toward the door. We need an exit, fast. A new sound rose beneath the alarm, metal scraping, distant doors opening. Then, moaning. A chorus of it. Clara's face tightened. They've been keeping infected here. Controlled. Contained. And now they're letting them loose. As if on cue, a guttural shriek echoed through the ventilation ducts, followed by the clatter of something dropping into the hallway outside. The infected were no longer wandering mindless, they had been released. Thomas looked at Clara. We move now or we don't move at all. She nodded. Maintenance tunnels. This way. They sprinted into a storage room adjacent to the server chamber. Clara kicked open a vent cover leading into a narrow crawlspace. The metal was hot, humming with electrical current nearby. As they crawled, Thomas could hear them, the infected, swarming the hallway. But they weren't banging wildly or attacking randomly. They were coordinated. Herded like dogs toward their location. This isn't just a lockdown, Thomas whispered. It's a test. They're watching how we survive. Clara didn't argue. Then we'll give them a show they won't forget. The vent opened into a dark utility shaft. Clara dropped first, landing silently on grated metal flooring. Thomas followed. Below, blinking lights showed a buried lab, forgotten and sealed beneath the tower. But the hum of generators and glowing monitors told another story. Someone was still running experiments. They stepped inside. Large reinforced glass chambers lined the room. Each held an infected subject, but these weren't mindless husks. One stared directly at them, eyes twitching with awareness. Another bared its teeth but didn't move. Inside their skin were strange metallic nodes, like implants. Identification tags were still attached to their uniforms: soldiers, civilians, even scientists. Thomas recoiled. They were controlling them. Clara swallowed hard. This was never about a cure. This was about containment and control. Oracle didn't want to stop the virus, they wanted to weaponize it. Then the voice returned, not from the speaker this time, but from the shadows at the far end of the lab. You finally understand. Out stepped a man in a worn lab coat, older, lean, but eerily calm. His ID tag still read, Dr. Elias Grant, Oracle Director. I warned Jacob, Grant said. Told him not to share the map. But he left breadcrumbs anyway. And now you followed them here. Clara raised her weapon. You're still running this? Even after all this time? Dr. Grant didn't flinch. Not running, preserving. This is the only site left that still contains the original strain. Everything else out there is mutated, unstable. But here we have control. Thomas took a step forward. And what happens when someone like you loses control? Grant's expression darkened. Control was never lost. It was sacrificed. By fools who thought they could dismantle the program. Jacob. Others. Now, all that's left is clarity. Without warning, a distant explosion rocked the compound. Lights flickered. Clara looked up. What did you do? Dr. Grant smiled. Backup protocol. If you access that footage, the system began purging. This entire lab will be sterilized in 15 minutes. Thomas grabbed Clara's arm. We have to go. Clara backed toward the exit, keeping her gun trained. We're taking that drive. We're taking the truth. Take what you want, Grant said, stepping into the shadows. But the world out there won't believe you. They never did. They ran. Down corridors now flooding with red emergency lights, past rooms filled with equipment and silenced monitors. The infected were flooding in from above. Screams echoed behind them. But Clara had memorized the path. A utility ladder led them up through a filtration shaft and out into the woods behind the tower, just as the compound erupted in a column of fire and smoke. They didn't stop running until the tower was miles behind them. Only when the forest fell quiet did Clara speak again. We have the data. We know the truth. Thomas looked down at the charred remains of the map in his hands. We follow the next clue. End of Part 5. Smoke trailed into the sky behind them as Clara and Thomas trudged through the ash-covered forest. The explosion that leveled Tower 6 had lit the horizon like a sunrise, brief, burning, and unforgettable. Neither spoke for a long while. Only when they reached an abandoned ranger station, half-collapsed and crawling with vines, did Clara stop and pull out the drive. She sat on a broken bench, her face grim under the morning light. Thomas kept watch from a shattered window. Any survivors from the lab? Clara shook her head. No signs. Grant's plan worked, the purge destroyed everything. Her voice was cold. And everyone. Thomas lowered his rifle. You don't believe he died, do you? No, she muttered. He knew what was coming. That fire wasn't to kill us. It was to erase the evidence. She plugged the drive into her handheld scanner. Lines of encrypted code filled the screen. It's all here, she said softly. Coordinates. Names. Experiment logs. Oracle had outposts across dead America. Hidden. Underground. Thomas leaned in. Do any of them still have survivors? Clara zoomed into one of the maps. Maybe. This one's marked as a secure fallback facility. Could be abandoned, or worse, active. The location, Fort Helena, once a military communications hub, now deep in the quarantine zone. Rumors said the city had been lost within the first 2 weeks of the outbreak. The military never reclaimed it. Thomas frowned. It's 100 miles away. Then we better start walking. 2 days later, they reached the edge of the Deadlands, a barren expanse where even the trees seemed afraid to grow. The remains of a road wound through cracked soil and rusted vehicle shells. Skeletons of past convoys littered the sides, their occupants long gone, or changed. A sign leaned sideways, sun faded. Welcome to New Marlow, population, who knows anymore? Thomas stepped over an overturned bike. This place wasn't on any map. Clara scanned the area. But it's not empty. A faint trail of smoke curled from the town square. They approached cautiously. As they passed the shattered windows of a diner, a voice called out, sharp, nervous. Don't move. A teenager stepped from the shadows, holding a makeshift spear fashioned from a broom handle and sharpened rebar. His clothes were patched together from military gear and scavenged uniforms. I'll get you if you come closer, he shouted, voice cracking. Thomas held up his hands. Easy, kid. We're not infected. The boy's eyes twitched. You might be. Everyone turns eventually. Clara stepped forward, calm but firm. We're not turning. What's your name? The boy hesitated. Dax. Thomas kept his voice even. Dax, we need information. We're heading toward Fort Helena. Dax's eyes widened. Why? That place is cursed. People go in there, and don't come out. Clara exchanged a glance with Thomas. What happened? The boy dropped his spear slightly. A few months back, a convoy came through. Said they were from Oracle. They promised food, safety, even medicine. They left with 12 people. And? Thomas asked. They never came back. But sometimes at night, you hear sounds coming from the north. Like machines. Screams. And singing. Clara's stomach turned. Singing? Dax nodded. Voices. Like lullabies. Broadcasted through speakers. No one wants to go near. Thomas sighed. Sounds like Oracle left more than just ruins behind. Before they could ask more, Dax's eyes darted past them. Get down. Gunshots ripped through the air. They dropped instantly as a bullet shattered the diner's front window. From the rooftops, armed figures in scavenger gear moved quickly, flanking them. Bandits. Hunters. Maybe even ex-soldiers who'd gone feral. Clara and Thomas rolled into cover as Dax sprinted into the back alley. This town isn't abandoned, Thomas growled. It's a trap. They fired back, using the wreckage of a delivery truck as cover. Clara reached into her bag, pulling out a smoke charge from Tower 6. Cover me. She tossed it high. It burst into thick white fog. Gunfire halted as visibility dropped. Move. They sprinted behind the smoke, following Dax's lead through tight alleyways and broken doors until they reached the sewers beneath New Marlow. The entrance was hidden behind a collapsed church altar. They dropped into the damp darkness, catching their breath. Thomas looked at Dax. Why'd you help us? The teen shrugged. Anyone who walks toward Fort Helena without turning around deserves a shot. Clara nodded. Then come with us. Dax hesitated. I don't know. You know the terrain, Thomas added. And we've got a reason to reach that place. We're not just survivors, we're exposing the ones who did this. Dax thought for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right. But if I hear singing, I'm out. As the trio crept deeper into the underground, Clara pulled the drive from her pocket again and opened a hidden file, one that had only just decrypted. It showed a picture of her. Labeled, Subject, Clara Vale. Status, Escaped. Termination priority, High. Her blood turned to ice. She didn't tell Thomas. Not yet. Some truths could wait. End of Part 6. Night fell like a curtain over the ravaged landscape, swallowing the horizon in silence. Clara, Thomas, and Dax stood on a crumbling overpass, staring down at the remains of Fort Helena, once a military stronghold, now reduced to a twisted maze of barricades, collapsed buildings, and flickering lights. It's still got power, Thomas whispered. Dax narrowed his eyes. Which means someone, or something, is still inside. They descended the overpass carefully. The outer walls had collapsed in places, but the reinforced checkpoint gate remained mostly intact. A sign sprayed with black paint read. Quarantine zone, no entry, by order of Oracle. Clara checked the handheld scanner. Signal is strongest here. Whatever Oracle left behind, it's broadcasting from the heart of this base. As they passed the first row of sandbags, a faint sound filled the air, a warped melody, like an old music box playing underwater. Dax froze. That's it. The singing. The eerie tune echoed from within a broken speaker mounted on a bent light pole. Static cut in and out. Then, a woman's voice, distorted. Come home, it's safe here. You are not alone. Clara clenched her jaw. They're using audio lures. Psychological triggers. Meant to attract survivors. Or bait them, Thomas added grimly. They moved silently through the outer yard. Barracks stood empty, long since looted or burned. Torn flags flapped in the wind. Every step felt heavier. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Inside the operations building, Clara found a terminal still running, barely. She connected the drive. The screen flickered, then displayed a login prompt. Need a password, she muttered. She tried a few keywords, Oracle, Project Revenant, Echo Point, nothing worked. Then she hesitated and typed in, Vale_0317. Access granted. Thomas turned to her. Why did that work? Clara didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the screen. Lines of files opened. Test logs. Subject reports. Termination orders. One folder made her skin crawl, active subjects. She clicked it. Photos loaded. Subject number 019, Clara Vale, status, contained. Subject number 020, Thomas Greaves, status, pending retrieval. Her heart stopped. She turned to Thomas slowly. He was staring at the screen. You too, she whispered. Thomas's eyes darkened. I didn't know. I was told I volunteered for survival trials. I thought I was helping. He stepped back. Clara, what were we? Clara scrolled through the files. We were part of a test group. Oracle was creating people immune to infection. You and I were both test cases. But something went wrong. Why are we still alive? Thomas asked. Because we escaped, Clara replied. They didn't purge us. They used us. Suddenly, the screen went black. A deep, mechanical voice replaced the silence. Unauthorized access detected. Facility lockdown engaged. Red lights flashed throughout the building. Run! Clara shouted. Alarms blared. Metal doors slammed shut in the corridors around them. They barely made it out of the ops building as drones rose from hidden panels in the ground, scanning the area with red beams. One spotted them and let out a deafening screech. Thomas shot it down, but more were coming. They ducked into a nearby medical center. Inside, the rooms were filled with containment pods. Most were shattered. Some still contained decomposing bodies, others housed moving shapes. One pod hissed. The creature inside blinked open bright, intelligent eyes. It wasn't fully turned. Its skin was pale, veins darkened, but it looked human. Until it opened its mouth and whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Clara stepped back. "Who are you?" "Subject 021, it rasped. "Failed, not dead, not alive." "Why didn't Oracle terminate you?" "Because I see. I hear. They watch through me." Dax looked horrified. "Let's get out of here." They pushed deeper into the facility, following Clara's scanner toward the signal source. It led them underground, to a sealed vault door marked Project Haven. It slowly opened with a hiss. Inside, a massive chamber lined with cryotanks and computers still humming. At the center was a glowing cube, the source of the broadcast. Around it were journals, maps, and hard drives. "This is it," Clara whispered. "This is where they stored the truth." Thomas began scanning files while Dax stood guard. The music box melody played again, now clearer. A woman's voice echoed through the chamber. "Hello, Clara. You've come far." Clara spun. "Who is that?" The voice was inside the cube, a pre-recorded AI built using someone's voice. The same voice that narrated the documents. Oracle's lead scientist. Clara's mother. "If you're hearing this, it means you found what I left behind. I'm sorry. For what I did. For what you became." Clara felt her knees, the weight of it all crashing down. Her entire life, her escape, her immunity, her survival, had been engineered. Thomas knelt beside her. "We can still stop this. We expose them. We show the world what happened here." From above, the sound of footsteps echoed. Then boots. Dozens. Dax looked up. We've got company." Clara stood, voice steady. "Then we finish what we started." End of Part 7. Let me know when you're ready for Part 8, where Clara, Thomas, and Dax make their final stand, as the truth is revealed, and a choice must be made between survival and justice. The chamber trembled as heavy footsteps closed in above. Dax raised his rifle, sweat beading on his brow. "They're coming through the ventilation shafts. Fast." Clara stared at the glowing cube, the last piece of Oracle's truth, humming with cold precision. Thomas frantically downloaded the files onto a drive. "How much longer?" she asked. 30 seconds, maybe less, he muttered, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen. The voice from the AI cube repeated its final line. "This is the last chance to make things right. Tell them the truth. Or burn with the lie." Clara's mother had known the horror she helped create. This wasn't just data, it was evidence of the apocalypse's origin, the weaponization of the virus, the twisted human experiments, and the cover-ups that doomed the world. The door above exploded inward. Black-clad soldiers descended like shadows. Not zombies, living enforcers sent to ensure the secrets died with the facility. Dax opened fire, covering Thomas. "Upload complete." Thomas shouted, yanking the drive free. "Go!" Clara yelled, grabbing the cube and stuffing it in her satchel. They bolted down the corridor that led to the facility's underground monorail, long dormant, but Clara had studied its schematics from the vault's old blueprints. Sprinting past flickering lights, dodging bullets and shrapnel, they reached the monorail platform. Clara slammed her fist against the terminal. Come on, come on." The system buzzed to life. After a long pause, the rusty monorail car hissed open. Just as the soldiers turned the corner, Clara, Thomas, and Dax dove inside. The doors closed and the rail car lurched forward, vanishing into the tunnel just as gunfire tore through the air behind them. The monorail emerged 5 miles outside Fort Helena, near a ridge overlooking a broken highway. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in a cold, pale orange. They stood in silence for a moment, catching their breath. "What now?" Dax asked, bruised and bleeding. Clara pulled the satchel forward and held up the drive. "We broadcast. We leak everything. Radio towers, satellite feeds, whatever still works. Oracle won't let it go public," Thomas warned. "Then we make it impossible to stop," Clara replied, determination burning in her eyes. "They wanted the world to forget. We'll make sure they remember." They journeyed to an old weather station marked on Oracle's map. Clara recognized it from one of the journal pages, a hidden backup node once used to transmit secure field data. If any system still had a functioning uplink, this was it. Inside the station, the power grid was flickering but salvageable. Thomas patched the drive into the comms console, overriding its ancient security. "This'll get the signal out to anyone still listening," he said. "Shortwave, satellite bounce, even old military bands." Clara uploaded the files, test logs, subject profiles, video footage of experiments, audio from Oracle scientists. She included her mother's final message. Finally, she looked into the old camera mounted on the console. "This is Clara Vale. If you're hearing this, you deserve the truth. Oracle lied. They created this plague. They turned us into weapons, then buried us in silence. But we survived. And now, the world deserves to know." She hit send. A red light blinked. Then the console emitted a sharp tone. "Transmission sent. Broadcast successful." They had done it. That night, as they camped in a ruined farmhouse, they watched the sky. One by one, lights flickered on in distant towns, not electrical grids, but fires, signals, flares. People responding. Survivors waking up. Clara sat quietly by the fire. Dax looked at her. "What now?" She took out the map, the one that started it all, stained and torn but still intact. "This map, it led us through a dead country. But maybe it can lead others too. Not just to Oracle. To hope. To truth." Thomas smiled faintly. "Dead America still breathes." In the distance, faint voices echoed from a radio receiver. New voices. Survivors calling out. Some confused. Some inspired. One simply said, "We heard you. We believe you." Clara closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Epilogue. Months passed. The broadcast spread like wildfire across the fractured remains of society. Oracle's name became known and reviled. Survivors formed networks, camps began to unite, and rogue operators within Oracle defected, bringing even more secrets to light. Clara, Thomas, and Dax never stayed in one place too long. But they became legends, ghost voices on the radio, known as the Mapmakers, guiding survivors through the ruins with truth and hope. Some say Clara still carries that glowing cube, its AI whispering in the dark. Others say she vanished into the Rockies, building a hidden safe zone for those who can't fight but refuse to die. But one thing is certain. The world was broken. But not silent. Because one lone survivor followed a map. And turned forgotten clues into a new beginning. End of part 8/end of story. Let me know if you want the next title started, or if you'd like this story adapted into a photo prompt series, short script, or audio version.